It's a work session, and it is going to be talking about our legislative priorities for our delegate, Tim Clark, Director Clark. Thank you very much for doing that this year, for the 2024 General Assembly. And before we do, we will take roll. I first would like to say this is a special meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act. The purpose of this meeting is a work session to discuss legislative priorities for the 2024 WASDA General Assembly with Board Director and Board Legislative Representative, Mr. Tim Clark. First, we'll take roll, as I said. Director Song. Director Song is absent and unexcused. Director Cook?
Present.
Director Clark?
Present.
Vice President Farah?
Present.
And I am present. And Director Clark, could you lead us off in this discussion today?
Yeah, if you're doing it online, you probably want to be on page 13. And I'm going to speed through a lot of this because it's pro forma. You're pretty much stuck with what was going to occur. But just some comments. The goals are important because they are mandated instructions to WASDA. So I just throw that out as a warning. But the very first thing up will be the consent agenda, and the short version of it is, if you ever have someone that wants to question why is public school financing so complex, and you need a laundry list of the individual categories of state funding, they'll be listed in that particular item. And the big deal was, but do they actually fund it? And so they wanted to put, for WASDA's legislative position, we want ample funding stated so we don't have to worry about shortfalls and mid-year budgets and whatnot. So the short version is that'll pass. All right, bylaws. Meetings of WASDA, again, nobody's going to object. They're trying to insert a student rep onto that whole process. Then under Article 3A, or Article 10 rather, there are actually two recommendations. And the one, actually the WASDA review board got into it and asked for a simplified version. And to be perfectly blank, that's what's going to pass. So let that go. All right, under association operations, under goals, page 29, forgive me while I race to that, he said. I've got 29 for me. Yeah. All right, page 29. There were actually 4 submissions, all basically questioning local control, and the simple resolutions committee recommendation was do not pass. And I'm going to tell you that's exactly what's going to happen. On the WASDA equity statement, it pretty much is pro forma. I don't see an issue with that. Under category 2, capital facilities and school construction, I'm gonna identify something that I personally hadn't paid attention to, but now is gonna show up. There was a legislative, literally law put into place to basically deal with building emissions. And the Department of Commerce for the state was supposed to put forward clean building performance standards, which they did. So the law was passed in 2019 and then expanded a bit in 2022. All of that basically sets up benchmark. So there's one for 2030, one for 2040, and so forth. The reason that is significant to us is, of course, it involves a significant cost. And so to no one's surprise, WASDA immediately jumped on the wagon and said, we got to have support to actually make this happen. Actually, Wade, forgive me, but we're actually already working on that, are we not?
Just to clarify, we're actually working on what, zero emission vehicles or?
No, this is for buildings.
Okay.
It's what they call
Which
the
page are we on?
energy use intensity.
Which page?
And it's under WAC 19450, rules compliance.
It's 37.
Great, thank you. Just 1 second. I'm on.
I found that in that
It's
one
that way.
was interesting, is the wording changing that buildings are part of basic education.
Yes.
And that is a wording change that I think is interesting and important.
Anyway, the short version is I'm recommending go with 8 because that's the rewrite and is going to be the one that's going to pass.
So you're referring to
Yeah.
financing school facilities in partnership between the state and local districts,
Yes,
that piece?
yes.
Okay. I without having all the context here, I mean, obviously, we would love for the state to fund our capital projects
Yeah.
more than they currently do, which they do not, and so that'd be very helpful. So, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, but it's just, we need that awareness that that freight train is coming, and that's the only reason I throw it out. That's because it's going to happen. And so not surprisingly, it's again, the rewrite, and 9 is going to be the one that's going to pass because that was recommended to pass. 10, same thing, and 11, same thing. So people looked at and tried to get into the weeds, trying to get at, what does that actually mean to us? And when you got, what do we got? 295 school districts? You can see the problem right away in rural versus urban and all the rest of it. But again, once it's gone to that resolution committee and they've reviewed it, that's the one that's going to pass. So I'm just informing you, and you can look at the thing. And then,
And you're saying number 9,
yes,
and so that was page 45.
yes. And 10 is 51, and 11 is page 57. Okay, and then the Clean Buildings Act funding is, as we've already discussed, quite obviously going to become a high priority. Under category 3, funding and allocations, it's recommended to vote no on that change of the state. And again, it's smaller districts and some of the issues that they have with that. I'm not going to bother going through Apple funding because that's self-explanatory. And the rest of them are, again, you got 18A and 18, and of course 18A had a do not pass, which meant 18 became the rewrite, and that is what's going to pass. And then other things. I am going to just real quickly mention MSOC because I got uptight with one of our state reps on the budget committee. When you'll see in the wider positions, there's technology. But when I started to talk to said legislator about laptops, because very clearly that became basically a must-have thanks to COVID. And at that point, if everybody's got them and that's how you're teaching, then logically, of course, you should in fact be funding it. But when I brought that up, they didn't want to stick that under technology, and she said it was going to come up under MSOC, which is materials and supplies. And there's a collision coming that's inescapable. Depends upon your school district, how low in the grades you actually actively employ laptops. Clearly, the larger urban districts are embedded, and other school districts are doing as well as they can. But I mention that because I can guarantee you it's going to show up again in December when I have to go down and talk to them. The other ones I think are, well, 23 mental health supports and counseling access, and that's not a surprise. That's a major issue for all the urban school districts. Well, actually all school districts, but in urban school districts. And I only mention that in passing. There's one other side event. I remind you that King County is putting on the ballot in November a request for funding for mental health clinics. Now, what they're trying to do is hoping that that passes, and that between that and what we're trying to do within the public school system is hopefully begin to access funding to Medicaid and Medicare. That obviously would tremendously stabilize all the approaches that we're currently using. I have no idea whether that's actually going to occur or not, but I just bring that to your attention is it reaches across so many different categories. All right. Other than that, is there anything listed that anybody feels they need to go into? Because most of them, of course, are stabilized again down under learning amendment proposals, legislative positions. There's a 46A that got the do not pass, and then there's a 46, and that's the rewrite by committee to verify that we're meeting the needs of public agencies and public law. Anyway, those are, you'll notice that they're under permanent positions. So what you're basically saying is we've got people looking and trying to tweak words in it, but the bottom line is the topic is what it is, and not surprisingly, it's been with us for a long time, and it's always an issue of funding. So I wasn't going to beat that to death. Okay. So with that, it becomes a question of what we might do with our board priorities. Now I've got, I would call your attention to the email that we sent you that basically had last year's board priorities. And not to overstate the obvious, but well, I'll read them. Require a simple majority vote on school bonds, full funding for prototypical school model, coherent plan for student lunch debt in Washington State, expanding basic ed, artificial intelligence, and by the way, that longer definition on that was, of course, in classrooms in terms of usage. So it was very specific. And then universal preschool, that of course reaches into those smaller districts and the struggles that they have. So first of all, is there any question on those six?
Number two, I was trying to look at what is going through, which one that actually pertains to. There feels like that there's many different ones.
And you're correct. It's many different attacks on why aren't you funding basic education?
Correct.
Because quite obviously, there actually is, adopted by the state, a prototypical model. But the problem with it is what do you actually jam into that? So Our constant struggle in the district has been things like nurses, things like even certain types of counselors.
Yeah.
If you want to address
Yeah,
that.
basically that one's been on for, as far as I can remember.
As far as long as we've probably had school districts.
And for all of us, it is, it's a formula model. It's been around forever, and there are states that are moving away from that. And that is the push. It's more, it should be around the needs of students, right? Instead of just a formula. And as you said, Director Clark, there have been different ways to approach this, different organizations over time, but yeah, that's what I'll say.
So, and to help me out and to make sure I understand this fully, is that are these just things, these are topics that we want to support or are we wanting to say, here's the 5, I want to say bills, that's not the
Okay,
right
all
word.
So let's back up here. So this whole assembly thing is about putting together a directive with WASDA so that when they go to interchange with state legislators, they're very specific and basically saying, and we have the backing of fill in the blank.
Yep.
And so in the ideal world, quite obvious, well, here's the problem, okay? It's what the state has to deal with in terms of priorities. So you can sit there and read to them the Constitution of the state of Washington says the responsibility for public education rests with the state. And if that were true and actually carried out that way, we school districts wouldn't be going out panhandling through bonds and levies to basically try and run what is a state-demanded system. But again, at the state level, it's a fight over priorities. And so that's why I mentioned if you go to look at that laundry list under amply funding, you end up with, God knows, 55 different categories, whatever. And the catch is, if you've ever watched the state legislature actually perform, there is a House recommended budget, there's a Senate recommended budget, there is, of course, the governor's recommended budget, and you're going nowhere until you get the same numbers in all the columns. And so what it comes down to is if, I'll just make one up, the Senate Education Committee is stuck on whether they're getting adequate money invested in electric buses, all right? Okay, and the House sitting there is looking at, well, transportation money is a big deal to us, but we got a lot of rural schools and they can't invest huge amounts to make that change. So it's a wish list, but it's not a hard number to them. Well, if the Senate puts in a hard number, immediately you're looking at if they're putting more money in that category, where is it coming from? And that's where the fights obviously break out. So for us, when you actually fill this out, and what will hopefully eventually end up is a priority of 10, and when I go down in December to sit down with state legislators, I've got to make sure those are our board issues and we at least talked about them. We may end up getting, here's a classic. We have been blessed in the 33rd District with a state rep, Tina Orwell, who really did look at the need for mental health in the school districts and chose Kent as a pilot for that particular investment. Now, that's a real deal because that's services to kids. Now, we're certainly not the only district that's got a large number of kids that are certainly going to need those services. But what it does do is it's a beginning point because we can use the model, Kent, to demonstrate what we did with it and whether it made a difference. And that, of course, ups the stakes when you go back in to deal with the state legislature. So the the conversations are important. You don't get magic fixes, which is why you got all those permanent positions. And the beginning point, without a doubt, would be the prototypical school model. And to the best of my knowledge, they've never met that obligation. Would that be correct, Superintendent?
That is correct.
So you can see when I take from you, we're going to lay out certain things. And that's where we'll press. And depending upon, to be perfectly honest, we had done very well with our state representatives. We have 6 of them, 3 in the 47th and 3 in the 33rd, and they've been very responsive. I mean, it's not a wasted conversation. Things don't move swiftly, but they do move. And then every once in a while, something gets tossed into the mix that forces an immediate reaction. And we've been working on things, and if they correlate, that our voice becomes very loud at that point. So that's what my recommendation is. Yeah.
I still don't feel like my question was answered. I'm sorry. I thought it was I agree with you, everything that you said, but I'm still trying to answer one question is, are we trying to come up to, because there's also an importance, like you said, like the House and the Senate have 2 different versions, things like that. So language matters, right? And so if somebody's talking about prototypical school model over here, and then we also have, let's fund literacy over here. Well, yes, literacy is part of that, but it's not exactly the same. So my question to you is today, with what we're looking for, what you're looking for to go walk away from here is, here is the, I think it's 5 that we asked for each person. What is my individual top 5 items that are from the list of the WASDA submissions?
Right.
Or are we looking for overall topics? Because again, the prototypical school model, I think, could fit under number 9 for basic education, class size, unfunded mandates, fully funding basic education, and MSOC funding, literacy, and maybe even tax revenue. So that's a whole, like, do you see where my question is?
Okay, and I'm gonna pop the bubble here. When you talk about when they actually set the numbers down, it's too late. Your ability to move a given body once they actually fill in the number is extremely limited.
I don't know what
But-
you mean by that,
all
I'm
right,
sorry.
So, all right, I go down in December.
Yes.
The session begins in January. This is an even-numbered year, and so it's a long session, and that's 120 working days. So what you end up with is, your first initial reaction is we're sending a signal, and by the way, I'm down there with every other school district, and so if you're Auburn, you're down there working the 33rd too.
Yep.
But most of them are gonna be, they're always gonna be very broad, because there are certain things that individual districts have to address. And if they don't get that basic money, well, of course, it's the game of reprioritization within your own school budget. And so if it has turned out that it is a true fight in the House Education Committee, that's when we will come back and lean heavily on our reps. If it's one of our priorities and there's a fight between A and B and we have to have B, we're gonna tell them, we have to have B. And realistically, I mean, they come back and meet within their districts in town halls and so forth. And when there's a basic need that's not being met, and particularly when it's dealing with your community's children, the voices are very directed. I mean, it's look, this is what you're asking us to do, and you're preventing us from doing it. So yes, they're very broad, and then the conversations get more focused as you work towards the end of that legislative session. But once you get all 3 budgets with actual numbers glued in, I'm sorry, but the sausage is being made and they're not calling you.
So what I'm hearing you say is, we are not looking for specific items on here, like my priorities are, I'm making up numbers, 18, 36, and 42. Instead, what you're wanting to walk away from the board today with is, here are the categories of items that are most important to us.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Director Song. Yes.
Question?
Yeah, I had a question about that prototypical model as well, and I think we're on the same page with looking for more of that clarification. One of the things that I also noticed in here was there's a lack of consistency in terms of the terms and the verbiage that's used. So when we're going to advocate for the full funding of this prototypical model, what is the operational definition for what that model looks like, so we know specifically what to advocate
Yeah,
for?
that's actually in state law. They did, way back when they said they were going to fully fund schools, actually didn't have the money, but to show they were doing something, actually listed what was in the prototypical model.
And I
So-
guess
but
that's
it
where.
doesn't. But it doesn't give you numbers that, like how many
Yeah.
counselors per, fill in the blank.
No, and I'm not asking about the numbers. I guess my question is starting to evolve towards, we have what's currently written and outlined, and I guess operationally defined, but now that we're introducing new topics such as AI, advances in technology, how does that come into the mix with the existing language to what we're trying to present?
Well, all right, so AI in technology in classrooms is specific. It's a separate category where they actually got into, you have to have some form of regulation, you have to have some agreement where it's appropriate. Literally, they do spell it out.
For the AI as well?
Yep.
Oh, I missed that part. Okay, yeah, because I think the reason why I ask is because as we're putting together our top priorities, I want to make sure that I'm also not being redundant with what I'm kind of ranking as my priorities. If, like with what President Margell said, like a lot of those seem like they can overlap.
They
And
do.
So if
They
that is
do.
the case, would it be, I guess, a waste of my top 5 in my ranking to include some of those if other board members also feel like this kind of overlaps with that prototypical model? Or should we kind of just, can we just say prototypical model and then as a board define what we want to put under that so that we're not, I guess, duplicating requests?
Personally, I wouldn't do that. What's gonna happen, you're gonna get a form and we're gonna ask you to name your top 5.
Yeah.
But what I'm gonna get back eventually from Carolyn is our top 10 if there's
Yeah.
not agreement.
Well, because I think a lot of us, from what I've heard so far, is in agreement with this prototypical model of funding. It's just, I think it would save us a lot of time if we're able to categorize what falls under that so that we can save room in our top list for other things. That way we can just go in and say prototypical model of funding, not prototypical model of funding, and literacy, like President Margell said, when those two can be lumped together.
Superintendent Vela, do you wanna help us
Yeah,
wade through
I
this?
think, so Director Song, it's a yes and yes, yes and, that for you to list prototypical school model, you could do that and actually go ahead and say AI as, going back to the outcome today is you would do your 5. And the final list will be 10. So I think you can do that. So you're not, you're using your time wisely by doing that. Here's why. Because once this goes to all 295 districts, it's gonna start to get whittled down even more. And the conversation you have here is not to go whittle it down,
Yep.
to get the big picture. So back to, I think, President Margell, I think that's what I would recommend the board consider, is to think of your knowledge and what you know about funding. We already know we don't get fully funded. And list your priorities that way. You also know we don't get fully funded for special education. And it costs districts, anywhere from 15 to 20% of their budget comes out of somewhere, right? I'm giving you big pictures because all of that fits that model as well.
No, and that makes sense. I'm asking more for just our board in terms of when we're putting this list together, I think it'd be really beneficial if we're all on the same page with knowing what we're advocating for. Because if my definition and understanding of prototypical model is different, just more for consistency's
No,
sake.
I think, and I'll make sure I'm clear, that you are going to do that we will do that. We'll put all your
okay.
information together for you. So it's not gonna go for naught, what you believe in and what you believe. So Director Cook, Director Clark, all those will be collected by Ms. Curry, and that will be your prioritized list of 10 that we will take, that Director Clark will take.
Okay. And then the second question I had, sorry, was going back to, what was it, category, I think it was 4, the mental health one. I'm just seeking clarity. When it comes to the funding piece with how they're gonna allocate the money if it passes, how does that interact or interfere with a lot of the other local and statewide legislations on mental health? Do they all come from different sources and then we kind of collect them all together? Or is it, if you get it from one pot, you're disqualified from another?
I couldn't answer how they would fund something like that, but what I can answer is your process you're going through here is it mental health that you want WASDA to support? Because it's gonna be a broad range of areas to use it, including the amount of money that goes to it. So I would more look at it again, do we wanna keep, do you want WASDA, well, let's go down to your Director Saab, that if that's the area that you want, I guarantee somebody else is going to have that as well, and it may end up as a top area for WASDA or not. And the other thing I will say is, keep in mind that the state only has X amount of dollars. And that, I think it was back, Merrill, about 6 years ago, 53 or 54% of the budget went to education. It is now 43, 44%. So this conversation we're having is, there's less money that they're going out. So I would say less is more, be more succinct, and what is it that you want WASDA to be able to move forward on your behalf as a board, but also give your own personalized areas.
17.
Okay, so
was a-
let's just make sure that we're all in the same, because I think Director Song and I are both kind of, these are positions.
Yeah.
This is not, they are not specific items that we have. So we can say, we're looking for basic education funding, and it may be several of these that fit underneath it. It may be mental health, and if you look on page, I think it's 78, it's really generic. It's just, we believe, and it kind of goes through kind of regardless of what your socioeconomic class is, you should be able to get mental health in these kind of areas very broadly. It doesn't go through specifically how it's done. It's just when we're advocating at a state level with our legislators that we are talking, we have 15 minutes, this is what we care about. We care about fully funding basic ed, mental health, and transportation, or whatever the ones that we decide them to be, right? So it's not going to be a specific item, it's going to be a topic, and we're going to choose our top 5 from here.
Yeah. And I agree with everything you said.
Okay.
The piece
I think I was
that-
clarifying it for myself.
No, that clarified my question too, of what I was asking. And I guess using today and the time, that's kind of where I was going in with those questions, is making sure that we all have the shared understanding, so that way when Director Clark does go and has those conversations, we can at least have had the conversation so that we can all start exchanging different talking points and arguments and topics.
I did look up the RCW 28A 150-260, and it does go through, like, literally penny by penny in the different areas that I think is the prototypical model. It's from a school year in the past, I'm trying to remember, a couple of years ago, when it was written, and then says that it would be affected by inflation at the inflation level each year. So, and then I did see the update in it, though, however, about school lunches for the 24-25 school year.
Sorry, one more, and then I know Director Farah had a question. Are we gonna have another time after the 6th, after we give our top ranking, to then go more into depth with the conversations about how Director Clark is gonna go advocate and speak on behalf of some of these things? One example, let's use the mental health one because I have that one up. The language to me doesn't seem like it captures all the services that we would want in schools, based off of just the Medicaid funding terms, the definitions and categorizations of services. And so there are some services that are mental health related, but then are considered medical services. And so would those be covered? And so when would we have a time for us, say that's on our top 10, for us to then share our thoughts and opinions with Director Clark, so when he goes and has these conversations, he has a lot of our inputs as well.
If I may, the WASDA, as Director Clark as our delegate there, is just helping choose the priorities for WASDA.
Oh, okay.
We are all advocates.
Right.
And in fact, I would say everybody online, everybody on the phone, everybody in our community should be involved. But particularly, I think, us sitting at this table here today, because we probably have some of the most close knowledge to it. And also, it's obviously something that we love enough that we're here at 5:36 on a Wednesday night to talk about it. So, I just want it clear that Director Clark is just our delegate for WASDA for helping choose the WASDA priorities. We are all part of going and advocating on the Hill and talking to our representatives, and I think that that is an important relationship that we should all have. So, sorry, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that it, yeah.
Okay.
But
Oh,
Director
I just wanted to reiterate what Director Clark was saying, which is the assembly is the voting of the language that WASDA is going to submit to the legislators. And that goes through the whole day. You know, do we support this? Do we not support this? What we as a board and district have to do is we have to look at our priorities and then list them out. And that 10 priority has to be sent, I think, after the assembly, so that WASDA knows what priorities each district has. So as broad as it can be, because you can't be very specific and then ask for specific things, and then legislators will look at you and go, couldn't that be fit over here? So that's what I just wanted to add.
Thank you.
So, if I can, so realistically, that is a concern of yours. That obviously is broad-based and not necessarily exactly what you want. But if we put that on our list, what will happen is, well, first of all, it is going to show up in the state legislature, as I've already pointed out. When they're running pilot projects, they know they've got a problem. So there's going to be a much expanded conversation coming on that. But it will always, unfortunately, be up to individual school districts how they actually want to approach that problem because of their resources or dispersal or whatever access points have to become available and whether they can provide that. Anyway, you might want to glance at, so I gave you 18 other categories than the 6 that we chose last time.
Oh, I was wondering. I was like, there seems like to be some really missing from here. Okay, thank you.
Well, and that's because I was going to widen the topic just a little bit. Here's one, Wade. I asked Wade about 14, which is state funding for full breadth of co-curricular activities, because my curiosity was, what did that actually mean to us in terms of our access to funding? And Wade explained it to me. I'll ask you to explain it to the rest of us.
Yeah, excuse me. Currently, right now, a lot of our co-curricular and curricular activities, athletics activities, clubs, ASB, performing arts, all those things are funded through our EP&L levies. So we go out to our local community and the taxpayers to help them support that part, so we can provide a more robust opportunities for our kids because the state does not fund that portion.
So it's the game of why we have levies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
We have to go out to our local taxpayers and ask them for support in this way when the state doesn't fully fund things that we believe are important and critical to our students to have access to. So that being one of them.
So it's, well, I mean, the short version is, we're trying to reset state priorities, and there's more needs than there is money, so there's news. Superintendent Bella, there was one here about enhanced funding for transitional bilingual education. And I would assume that we are receiving money in that category, and the question is, are we getting what we need to do the job?
We are not receiving through the grant process, and I would say every district in the state, depending on how many multilingual qualified students they have, just through that one grant. And so this would be additional enhanced funding. The state over the years has provided additional funding, but it's nowhere near what we need. As an example for Kent, and I may be off on the numbers, Raul, but I believe the grant is 8-9 million, and we actually pay out of the general fund even more money to support our MLE qualified students. Do you
So,
want to share that?
yes, so for our MLE program, and you referred to a program called TBIP, is the acronym for it. That program is providing us $14 million per year. Our total expenditures per year is about $20 million, so we're upside down by about $6 million every year.
Okay. And then 9 was expanding access to equitable funding for all dual credit options, and I think that's the same story, is it
Same.
not? Yeah, so you can see we need to keep pounding away if we're gonna try and have those programs survive. So. All right, and then number 11, of course, graduation requirements and pathways. And we need support for creation of our programs. Is that basically accurate? I mean, what are we spending on not a dollar figure, but it's an investment?
So this one specifically speaks to additional. So if the requirements are going to be for graduation X, which we have, then what are all the pathways available for our kids to meet them? Not all of them meet them in the 4-year, 5-year. It may take longer, so we need additional dollars to be able to do that. And so it's same as our last conversation. So this is a priority. It's for that area, providing more options and additional funding for those pathways.
And again, under 5, climate impact mitigation assistance, and of course, when you go back under category 2, their land, this is what we're going to try and do and what we're asking for. So anyway.
So what does it mean, 2-year budget to OSPI? What does that mean?
I'll give
Yeah.
that to Raul, the 2-year budget. This number
3.
3, 2-year budget to OSPI.
We don't have those.
Oh, yeah, and that's,
It's over there.
It's up on the board.
Yeah, up on, yeah, yeah.
2-year budget to OSPI line 3.
What does that mean? Right.
Because I wasn't here when that was developed, so I'm
well,
sorry.
right now, you basically submit a statement.
So the 2-year budget would be that if this would be a priority for the board.
Okay.
Is to submit to OSPI a 2-year budget versus the one-year budget, which would be stability, et cetera. The problem with that is, well, I'll just leave my own.
I know, but that's the thing. If you're doing it 2 years, that's why I was asking the question, is then you really have handicapped us because things can change.
Yeah.
And it does, and I think one of the requirements that we do now.
Microphone.
I do, yes. One of the requirements in developing the budget right now, though it's not a 2-year budget, it is a 1-year budget, but we provide a forecast, a 3-year forecast. So while it's not an official budget, it's a picture of what the next 3 years might look like. And so you are approving when you approve the budget, you are approving the forecast as well, recognizing that that forecast could change depending on
The-
IPD
Oh my God, all
and
kinda, yeah.
labor negotiation
Right.
and things like that, so.
Tim, the one thing I was surprised to not see on the WASA, and something I'd heard about quite a bit last year, is transportation.
Well, transportation is, of course, a major budget. And I mean, if you go back through the full list, you'll find it is outlined.
Okay.
All right, well, again, I wasn't making the example up. There is, one of the proposals actually outlines what would you, we need funding to basically deal with the change from petroleum-based to obviously electric and going forward down that model, and where does the money come from?
Yep.
Because it's, and of course, and the big question, just us as ordinary citizens, is the pressure is to get away from carbon fuels, but where are the charging stations and who's paying for them? And I mean, the state would be obligated on state highways, but that's not going to answer our problem. So more to come on that road, I guess.
Okay, and so, Ms. Curry? Oh, there you are, sorry. How would you like us to submit each of our top 5 priorities? By email? On paper?
Absolutely. I have a piece of paper here for you tonight to please put them in order, 1 being your most important, 5 being your least of the very most important things as well. And we will take these, we will tally them up, prioritize them for you. They will come back on the September 11th meeting for you to approve
Actually,
and
we have to-
authorize
yeah.
Director Clark to take to the WASDA meeting. So I'll bring these out to you right now.
Do we
Thank
have
you.
a process in place for what happens if we have multiple ties and we go beyond the 10?
They're actually weighted, and so we actually do a weighted process. So last year, we did have ties, and so we basically ended up with our priorities from that list. And I think that whereas in the past we had done 5, we basically brought 7 to the, and
okay.
said like, hey, these are the ones these tied. And so we went ahead and brought those fully to the representative at that time.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, any additional questions?
So we have, I understand, the 18 plus the 6.
Yes.
Okay.
Any additional questions? Director Clark, thank you very much for your information today. We appreciate this, and it is 5:49, and we are adjourned.
Please make sure to
Thank
bring
you.
these to